Yeah, and it does have a slightly newer interface. In I think 2 versions ago, that interface changed. So we'll talk about the interface as well. Okay, cool. So most people haven't heard of it. So that's a great start. Just touching base in terms of people's familiarity. Okay, so let's just go into a random image and then we'll pick out some images that are better for describing pixel targeting. Okay, maybe something with a bit of a lack of color variation. Let's see here. Yeah, we'll start with this and see what we can come up with. Oh, this is actually a great image. We'll play around with this. So, I'm just going to showcase first and foremost where it is. Because there's so we it's in we're going to be using it in develop mode today, but it's also in edit mode, and basically in either mode it works very similarly. But we'll just showcase where it is so you can get a feel for it. So in edit mode, so luminance and color range, or pixel targeting as it was previously known, is located, I believe, under filter. Let's see here, select, and it has a section down here that's kind of dedicated to it, luminance and color range. So I use pixel targeting and luminance and color range interchangeably. They are the same thing, just so everybody knows. We just sort of changed the terminology to actually make it easier for newer users to understand. So, what it's going to do in edit mode, and also in develop mode is make selections. And just so people understand what a selection is, we cover them pretty extensively in our workshops. But a selection is a temporary sort of identification on your image of what space is going to be interacted with or changed in some way. So a very rudimentary way to understand selections, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, would be something like a lasso selection. This is a really basic, simple selection. And so what this illustrates to us is, hey, this red area that's indicated in the center after I've made a lasso selection, right? After I've sort of added an lasso selection on. This section here corresponds to the area that I'm going to impact with some form of adjustment. So in edit mode, what that might look like is it might look like me doing a vibrancy adjustment. Okay. So if I click on vibrancy, what it's going to do is it's going to take that selection that I've created and it's going to apply it as a mask. So this box here represents a mask, and that selection is representative of the space that I had selected using the lasso tool. So if I was to crank vibrance, for example, you'd see that that corresponds to the space I've created. So selections in general are very powerful, and obviously the way that they impact this image is by informing a mask, right? My selection has then become my mask, which is now corresponds to the adjustments that I make. So what that means to us when it comes to pixel targeting is that pixel targeting is another way to make selections. But selections can be made predicated on different things, as we discussed in the last workshop. We can select subjects using AI selections. We can select a background or the sky, for example. We can select different manual methods using the brush selection tool. We can select using shape selection or rectangular selection or the lasso like we have here. We can also select using something called like channel selection. So what that would mean is selecting based on RGB channels or I believe HSB channels or CMYK channels. So these are different ways to select things. In the case of manual selections, we select whatever I tell the software to select. In the case of AI selections, we make a selection predicated on an algorithm that ACDSee as a company has created for you, the user, to select based on sort of like case use value. So subject would represent, your first and foremost, would represent your focal point in your image, right? Whereas select background would represent the opposite of that. It would represent the sort of the space behind the focal point. So these all make very different selections. just a note before I begin to something that I always talk about when I'm talking about selections is overlays because I find them to be very useful. So uh, when I'm using ACDSee, I have a tendency to go to the select menu when I start, and I actually change the overlay. And so what that overlay is in this case, it's this red coloration that indicates the sort of temporary space that's going to see adjustments applied to it. And overlays, you're probably very familiar with marching ants, which is typically default in ACDSee. However, I'm not particularly fond of marching ants. I find it hard to see what's selected and what isn't selected. So I go to select and overlay options, and I typically go with selection highlighted, meaning that the area that is of interest to me is the one that is subject to an overlay. So I use this, and I recommend that you do too. I think it's an easier way of sort of interacting with it. I believe the third option is the selection exposed, so kind of the inverse of that. But it's totally up to you, whatever you use. There's some options there under the select panel. So select and overlay options. So, okay, so that's just kind of a very quick wrap up on selections and sort of understanding how selections impact the space here. So as I mentioned, selections can apply to a series of things. They can be manual selections, they can be AI selections, and they can be something like, based on specific channels or values. Much like RGB values or HSB values, luminance and color range operates kind of similarly to that. So in edit mode, I would navigate to luminance and color range by going to select and clicking on it right there. Luminance and color range, historically known as pixel targeting in the software, is a means to interact with luminance or brightness and color or hue. So what it means to you typically is when you have the tool active, I'm actually just put it in the center here. This probably makes the most sense. When you have the tool active and say you're using color range as a focus here, it's going to give you the option to make a selection. And you can see that my selection is active. It's predicated on that red sort of selection color there, that overlay. I can make a selection based on a series of colors. So while color range is active, I'm searching for a certain color range, a series of hues, and a degree of saturation by which to sort of interact with our space and make a selection. So what this actually looks like is if I take this wheel here, actually just out of curiosity, how many people have used the color wheel tool in ACDSee? This was introduced, I think, 2 versions ago as well. I'm just curious, who's seen this sort of user interface method? Okay, no, reluctantly. Okay, Norm, I have no, very little. Yeah, so this was a change to the interface we did a couple versions ago in ACDSee. And I think instead of using what we would call as sliders, so degree sliders, we changed it to this color range tool. And so there's a couple tools in ACDSee, as I mentioned. So the actual color wheel right here in the filter panel here, and I think tone wheels as well, that use this wheel setup. This is super powerful. And I think it's quite easy to understand. So I'm just going to quickly explain it so that when we actually use pixel targeting or luminance and color range in other images, it not only it makes sense, but you can also see sort of why I've made certain decisions. So at face value, there's these different sliders on the why can't I see my selection? you might not have color range active. So when you click on the color range icon here, that actually is what turns it on. Same goes for luminance. At base value, these are sort of turned off or not considered. And then by choosing, by clicking them on, you will receive a sort of an overlay. Now, that being said, you'll only receive an overlay provided that there's actually a color to select within that range, right? So if I go to yellow and green here, it's not going to select anything or very little in this case, right over here, because my image has very low values that correspond to the green hue here. So if you move this around, you might find that the selection increases. So for everyone else's benefit, when I slide this middle bar here, it actually moves it along in terms of the color spectrum. So I believe 0 is considered red, or sorry, red leaning on, yeah, I think it's red leaning on pink. And then it goes all the way up. So these color values increase until you get to 255 on the other end, which is that space right there. Awesome. I'm glad, Marv. There's more to it than this, but it's an awesome tool. So this changes the actual hue value. So that hue value is referred to as, it's the H and SB, and it just typically means the true hue. So if I'm selecting a color that I want to target, like blue, for example, and note that there's a ton of blue in my image, you can see that the selection changes to correspond to selecting the blue in my image versus, say, the pink. Okay. So the next aspect of this is I can refine my range. So I can refine my range by pulling these values inwards. And so now I'm omitting more of the magenta to red spectrum, and I'm omitting more of the sort of I guess purple to blue range, right? So these can be refined quite staunchly inwards until I have a very, very narrow selection, right? So a very narrow selection of, in this case, what appears to be pink, right? So I can refine that outwards again. So I can increase those values by holding these paddles and pulling them outwards. And that increases the range to incorporate not only purple, but little bits of the sort of magenta to red spectrum. Okay, so there's more than that though. The other thing that we can consider, right, is we can pull, Dave, I'm glad you figured it out. You can pull the values in terms of the saturation inwards and outwards. So by its default, it's going to incorporate a full range of saturation. What do I mean by saturation? So saturation is the degree to which a color is saturated, or in this case, how far it is away from a gray sort of spectrum. Gray having a no saturation, and a full hue, true hue having full or sort of maximum saturation in this case. So when I pull this slider from the very center towards the outside of my spectrum, what is being targeted is only the sort of true hues, right? So the hues in my image that are represented by very strong colors, very saturated colors. Versus if I pull this outwards and I do the exact inverse of that, say I pull the sort of maximum saturation outwards, you can see that my selection then changes to incorporate actually just the low saturated colors within this part of the spectrum. So let's just talk about what we're selecting using color range right now. So we know that we're selecting a hue that begins in sort of a rich purple color all the way to like a hard red. And then from within that, sort of color range, we're also selecting a color that has a very low, so zero zero saturation to essentially a middling saturation. So within the 20 to say 100 range. Okay. So that represents the selection. So we know we're selecting basically pink, red, purples within a low saturation. And so when we use this tool to correspond to the colors that we see here, note that during this interaction, I've seen my overlay change like 100 times, right? We're seeing it constantly adjust and readjust. Does everybody see that? That when I increase or change these values, the overlay selection is changing? So that's a huge deal. So we're seeing in real time, right? We're seeing, thank you. We're seeing in real time that these adjustments matter, right? So you might be curious about smoothness and skin targeting. Okay, so we'll just quickly talk about those. Smoothness, when I increase this slider, it's going to create a what would be the term for it? The term for it would be it works the same way as it sort of provides a gentle a gentle movement from the selection that we've incorporated outwards. And actually, what I can see is it's almost providing a blur effect on the actual color range meter itself. So what this means is it's less discriminatory from color to color. Okay. So when we increase the smoothness to its maximum value, you can see that the overlay has changed to be smoother on the outside. Essentially, it's less discriminatory of the colors versus a really sharp sharp selection. It not only does it change the actual user interface itself, it appears very hard and crisp colors, but it also corresponds to what we're seeing here. You know, you probably want to keep this somewhere in the middle, right? And the reason why would be this. If there isn't like a really staunch and abrupt change in colors in your image, and they're much more gradual, like we see in this image here, we're going to benefit from at least a minimum of 50 smoothness. And the reason why this is because if we were going to go to make a change to these colors, if we're going to impact these colors in a certain way, right? We want those colors to seem natural in their progression. So if we were to take this smoothness value, for example, smoothness value of 0, and we were to make an adjustment predicated on this luminance and color range, which we're going to do right now, folks. So I'm going to hit OK on this, and I hit OK. It's going to set this as my active selection, right? And then all I'm going to do is let's make some change here. Let's make a clarity change here. So actually, no, let's do something that would be a bit more visible. Sorry, that's a bad example. Let's stick with the vibrance example. I think this is the best one. So we'll do vibrance, and I'll increase the vibrance here. So really harsh sharpness here, and that is visible in my image. There's very little transition between these clouds here and the clouds we see up here, right? So this is jarring. I would describe this as jarring versus a pixel targeting of, oops, not overlay, pixel channel and luminance versus a color range of, let's say the same thing. Let's go purple. I'll pull this inwards a little bit, and we'll increase the smoothness quite a bit. So we'll have a maximum smoothness this time. Click OK to add it to my active selection, and we'll make the exact same vibrance adjustment. So I'll click on vibrance here, and I'll just crank the vibrance. So you can really see a massive difference between the two. A vibrance with a high smoothing is self-justifying versus a vibrance with a low smoothing is such that I would actually need to go in and make further adjustments to this. Now, this only matters, as I said, smoothing only matters when our color changes aren't abrupt. If our color changes are very abrupt, a low smoothing or no smoothing at all might actually work just fine in my image. But an image like this, where there's so much variation between that initial pink and purple to this blue out here, a low smoothing might be a better choice. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm just hearing that Marv can't hear me. Yeah, feathering is what Dave said. Just testing my audio. You can hear me? Okay. It's in and out, you're saying. Okay, somebody can hear me well, others can't hear me. Okay, if it only cut out once and it seems to be okay right now, it might have been my connection. Okay. Okay, just one time. Well, let me know. It might be in my internet connection. But if everybody can hear me okay, then it seems like we're fine. But if I'm gonna have some issues, it's just breaking up a bit. Okay. Tell you what, folks, I'm going to just it seems okay. Okay. Hmm. Okay, well, I'll if this continues, I'll what I might have to do is just reset my internet just to make sure my connection is fine. But if everybody can hear me okay now, and it was just a one time or two time thing, then I'm not going to worry too much about it. Okay, cool. Thanks, guys. Okay, where was I? Well, let's hide this. Okay, so all I'm trying to illustrate here is the power of smoothing in relation to a active luminance and color range selection. So we can see the difference there. It's very clear. It's abruptness versus gradualness. And one person had mentioned, who said it was filtering. That is essentially what it looks like, right? It's a feathering, feathering between the sort of central focus outwards to the place that isn't selected. So that sort of represents color range, right? That's one of the things. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention, but I will mention now. Skin targeting is going to impact the orange spectrum. So we can either omit skin by reducing this, or we can target skin by increasing the value. So the benefit of this is we can target an orange spectrum from within the color range selection. If we're trying to say address, we're trying to make a selection of a woman's dress that's orange, but we don't want to target her skin so much, we can lower this value. It's very much the difference between saturation and vibrance, where saturation impacts the whole image and vibrance omits that sort of that spectrum of orange to sort of not adjust people's skin color too much. So if you've ever used vibrance versus saturation in other tools, it works the same way. So saturation is all encompassing versus vibrance is not. And that's what's going to be how this is going to work with skin targeting. Just a quick note about skin. Regardless of someone's complexion, whether it be a darker complexion or a lighter complexion, skin always falls under the orange end of the spectrum because if somebody has brown skin, that's considered like a dark orange. If somebody has a sort of like a whiter complexion, that's considered still an orange end of the spectrum. So when I say orange as a color, when it comes to skin targeting, that's because that all of those colors fall within that end of the spectrum. Okay, so we've colored color. We know what color range does now. We're up to speed. We sort of understand how the tool works and interacts. That's valuable. Let's just talk about luminance now. So luminance omits color or hue entirely and is now focusing on the brightness values, right? So if color range is hue and saturation, luminance range is the brightness values. So the values between 0, black, and white 255. So interacting with an 8-bit color spectrum, focusing on the brightness. Does everyone understand the distinction that I'm drawing here between H, S, and B, or brightness, color, and hue? I just want to touch base with that. That is too bad. So, just for benefit of anyone interacting here, when I'm referring to HSB values, I'm referring to series of 3 values. Okay, sure, I can repeat that. So, what I'm talking about here is luminance range focuses on it focuses on the brightness. So brightness being 0, 0 being black, and white being 255 or white. Whereas color range focuses on hue and saturation, right? So these 3 things together represent a full spectrum of what we see when we look at a screen. That sort of represents pixel values that we would associate with color and sort of brightness. So luminance range, what it interacts with is this. I'll just open up the color picker because I feel like it's a good way. It shows a really easy way to understand this. So color range interacts with hue. You can see that as I take this slider and I increase it or decrease it, you can see that the value of hue changes, right? So red being 0, and then yellow being about the 30 values, green being 80 values, cyan being about 120, blue being 175, pinks being 205, and then finally, sort of like the other end of the spectrum, coral kind of to red being 255. So when we interact with color range, we're interacting with this value, okay? So the hue value, but we're also interacting with a horizontal value, which is the saturation value. So a fully saturated color or a true hue would have a saturation value of 255. And then as I slide this further to the left, you can see that saturation value is decreasing and my color is becoming desaturated. So it's starting to become more gray, right? So when we're interacting with color range, that's what we're interacting with. We're interacting with this horizontal slider and this hue slider. Versus when we're interacting with luminance range, okay, what we're interacting with is the vertical slider. So vertical slider representing, oh, here we have black at 0. You can see that 0 value, brightness of 0. And as I increase this value vertically, that the number is going to increase, right? So it goes 150-ish in the center here, all the way to a fully bright color, which is represented by 255. So hopefully that is a good way to help you understand and visualize what's actually being interacted with when we engage with the luminance and color range sliders. On one end, we have color range, which is represented by hue and saturation. On the other hand, we have brightness represented here. So as such, brightness is a value that we can interact with in terms of if I want to represent darker colors here. Darker colors would be this end of the spectrum here, as indicated sort of by this, I guess, gradient, really, right? This gradient sort of tells us what we need to know about what we're selecting. So these darker colors are selected here, versus if I was to move these values further to the right, you can see that only lighter colors are selected here. And that corresponds with what I see in my image here. So, and the point of having 4 nodes, these 4 values that we can assign, is really to apply a degree of smoothness or feathering, I suppose, or sort of less a more gradual application than, say, maybe flattening these values out, which you can see as I flatten them out, they become a lot more sort of less what would be the word for this? It's more particular and more concerned with the the exact range of luminance that I'm describing. Rather, if I widen these paddles out here, then it's a little bit more forgiving, and it's definitely less discriminatory between values. So flat paddles equals really jarring selections, and really, really broad paddles would represent a sort of more smooth selection. So on one hand, we have the sort of range at the top that we're referring to, right? And on the bottom here, we have sort of the degree or severity of that that selection. Add detail is going to it's a very, very, very subtle selection here. Let me see if I can increase this. But in this case, it would care about sort of the severity between pixels. There doesn't seem to be any good examples in this image, but if there's any pixels that would not be selected between because like a sudden drop off in color or a dramatic difference in brightness, then that would be incorporated. The only area that I saw that was affected by it was this one right here, and I'm just trying to get it to be affected by it again, but it doesn't seem to be working. Oh, there's a little change there. But that's because of this like white spot that appears here. And then the detail range would just increase those values or decrease those values. So if I wanted to incorporate more of them, I would increase the detail range. And if I wanted to incorporate less, I would turn that off. You can see that affect the whites here, which allows for a subtle application between the luminance range. So main thing to understand is this targets the brightness in our image. So the values from black to white. We can keep those values really sort of static and very much like within this range as I see fit. Or I can broaden these paddles to make this effect more more subtle, right? And I can make it, I can smooth this effect if I pull these paddles way outwards. Does that make sense to everyone in regards to luminance? Is there anything you'd like me to go over in regards to this? This one's maybe a bit more complicated to understand. The user interface isn't as simple as the color range. There's a lot of numbers, but if we understand these as the range of colors and this as the degree between those colors, I think we're in a good place. Any questions at all before I go on? Can you see a graph the same time you are adjusting? Can you see a graph the same time? What do you mean by graph, Doc? It's a good question, but yeah, you can have the histogram active, which might help. That's a good point. So I don't have the histogram active right now. This is the histogram right here. So if I have my histogram active, I don't know if it'll adjust while I'm interacting with this luminance and color range. And the reason why, Doc, is because I'm not actually making any changes to the image. I'm only setting values to make a selection with. Does that distinction make sense? Whereas if I actually select this range, right? Here's the luminance range I want. And I go, oh, I'm going to make a curves adjustment predicated on this selection. Well, now my histogram is certainly going to change, right? The values start to change because I'm actually interacting with a color space that I've selected. When I apply the filter, will I see it though? Yeah, there you go. It changed. That application is now complete. Sanford's question was, you widen the bottom on the luminance and color range. What happens if you widen the top? Okay, so the difference between these two things, we'll just pull these in. So Sanford, you see that my selection here is represented in blue in this little kind of section right in the middle here. This little square. So when I widen this, I'm actually adding a range of, I guess, bright. So the term would be highlights to whites, right? So if I make this smaller, now my selection is only midtones, highlights, and whites. Versus if I pull the selection in the other direction, I have midtones selected as well as shadows and blacks. Okay. So hopefully that top selection makes sense. When I move these around, I make a selection predicated on those sort of spectrums, right? Now, what do the bottom sliders do? So if I'm selecting, let's say I'm selecting highlights, midtones, okay? What I can do, excuse me, is I can make the a gradient or feather from that midtone to the shadows or darker midtones. Same goes for this side. I can make those highlights sort of smooth feather between those and the whites. So when I pull these bottom tabs here, what I'm doing is I'm allowing that range of brightness to apply to a certain spectrum, like I've suggested, right? But also I've then smoothed that process so that it is less egregious in terms of its application. Okay, so that represents luminance and color range. This actually was sort of a full explanation of the tool, but I haven't even shown you where this exists in edit mode yet, or sorry, in develop mode. So I'd like to take an opportunity to do that. So we know where it is in edit mode. We know that it's in the it's in the select menu. And much like let's reset these. There we go. So in develop mode, it's still a component of a selection. Okay. And so selections in develop mode, like we touched base in our previous workshop, correspond to the masking type here. So if I'm masking, okay, that means that I'm making a selection. I'm making a mask of my image. And as soon as I choose a mask type, right, I can then make a pixel targeting in correspondence to that mask. So there's three manual masks. There's the brush, the linear gradient, and the radial gradient. And then there's the three AI masking. So there's AI subject, AI background, and AI sky. We're just going to use the brush tool right now. So I'm going to tell develop mode, hey, I'm going to make a brush mask of my image. And then from there, I can start the process of pixel targeting. So in this image, hey, I have a woman who's wearing a sort of taupe dress, and then I have a green background here, right? Now, let's see if I can show an example of why this matters. So let's say that I was to interact with the hue slider here. Let's see here. Oh, I haven't made a selection yet. Okay. Well, let's showcase that. So when we make a brush selection of my image here, so I'll make a brush selection. I'll show the mask there. Here's my brush selection. I'm just going to select the woman here in the center. And let's just see what this looks like when I go to make a hue adjustment. So hopefully everybody can see my selection in the center here. And let's change that yellow to green. That wasn't very strong. Let's see here. There we go. Okay. So I have made a orange. I've moved my orange, which sort of falls under this dress here, and I've moved it into the green end of the spectrum. I can do the inverse here. I can move it into the sort of purpley red end of the spectrum. Hopefully you see that this doesn't look great. Notably, it's kind of impacting her skin a lot. So we're going to try to adjust this using pixel targeting. So we have an active adjustment. That adjustment is a hue change based on a selection. So here's my mask. That's my selection. And then my adjustment is orange to green, right? So when I click pixel targeting, which is in the develop pane at the bottom of the mask panel here, when I click that, it's going to bring this up. It's going to bring the menu up. And the menu works exactly the same way as it does in edit mode. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to refine an already made adjustment. So unlike in edit mode, where I'm about to inform an adjustment that I'm about to make, pixel targeting in develop mode works on the back end of that. It's already being corresponding to a pre-existing adjustment that I've made. Let's click on color range and see if we can fix this problem. So the original color we had here was kind of like an orangey yellow. Let's see if I can refine this and maybe pull out some of these. There we go. I'm going to pull those out a little bit. The only place that I'm super worried about this is the thigh here and a little bit of the arm. If we can't get rid of those using luminance and range, I can fix it using the brush tool, but let's see if we can get rid of it. But just already a pretty big difference. Her skin is no longer green. Her hair highlights are no longer green. So what we're doing is we're using the pixel targeting tool to adjust a range of color predicated on a mask that we've made. This is a really powerful adjustment tool, right? And I'm just showing you, I'm personally right now, I'm just kind of showing you the sort of like a way to change the color of something, right? But this could also represent like saturation changes in an image. This can also represent, various changes to the brightness. There's a lot of different things we can do with this tool. But I think color range and using hue as an example is a good way to visualize things. So I've started with that. Doc asked, how do you bring up the pixel targeting pop-up? What I do is that when I have an active mask, so I have my mask menu here just at the very top, and I have created a brush selection, but any mask will do. So I have my active mask here, Doc. Hopefully you see that. And hopefully you can see that I've adjusted the orange slider in my image, the hue value of it. So that hue value has been adjusted. And then all I've done here is I've gone to use the pixel targeting pop-up window here, which is down in the bottom right-hand corner of the masking tool. And this little indicator right here illustrates to me that I have an active pixel targeting adjustment. So I pull it open and there it is. You're so welcome. So from here, let's see if we can further refine this so that it's not targeting the thigh area here. So I'm going to activate the luminance range. And then what I'll do, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get it. Let's see if I pull it out. Oh, maybe it's a shadow. That would make sense. Okay. Too far, and I goes into the changes the color of the dress again. Yeah, so we definitely want that. Let me see if I can pull that out. I don't think I'm going to be able to address that part here using the pixel targeting tool. So once I have my active color range and it's been improved, here's the before and the after, then all I need to do is then adjust the mask. So all I would do here is I would literally just turn off or brush off that effect in that little area there. We'll zoom in. And that corresponds to the change there. So I'll just brush that off. There we go. And then I'll just do that on the side of the arm as well here. There's already a little bit of a color change, right? And that corresponds to the lighting in the image. There's a very strong green here, so the light reflects off of the green, and that's what's being represented in this part of the image here. And I'll take it from underneath the nose there as well. A little bit on the right-hand side. And so once I've brushed those off, then my image is complete and the dress color has changed. And I can verify this by changing the color again and having it not impact the rest of my image there. So you can see how powerful this tool is from a from a you know from a selection point of view, especially when we have multiple similar colors interacting in the same space. Sanford asked, how do you turn off the mask? That's a good question. I just turn it off using this little checkbox here. And you can see that now that represents the change of my selection here. Uh, this is really just to help me see what I'm interacting with. So I turn it off and I turn it on when I do that. Note that even if I have the mask active, when I open up pixel targeting, I'll probably want to pop it off just so I can see my image better. The mask just shows me what I'm selecting, and then pixel targeting shows or helps me refine what falls underneath this criteria. Does that make sense, Sanford? Let me know if it does. We'll do one more image just to sort of illustrate in develop mode, and that kind of covers pixel targeting for today. I'll show you one more. I have this other image that has two different blues in it. We'll see what I can do. So subject here, first of all, there's a blue background. I'll show that to Richard in a moment. And then she's got blue jeans on. And actually, I don't know if you can see this, but she almost has this blue hue to her hair. And I think that's actually a reflection of the color space that she's in. Either that or she has this cool effect on her hair that, I'm unaware of. But point is, there's a lot of blue in this image. So what I'm going to do is, unlike making a brush selection, let's just make an AI selection of her. And there it is. So once we have a selection active, masking pops up. You can see that my overlay is there. And let's make a adjustment to the blue jeans, right? We talked about that. So let's just turn this off for a moment. We'll change purple to, or blue to purple. There we go. So purple's right there. Problem with this is obviously we're affecting a little bit of the reflection on her shirt, and then we're also impacting the hair, right? So we don't want to do that. So we'll show the mask again, open up pixel targeting, and we want to change the color range. So what I'll do is I'll target blue, right? That's the color we want. And then let's refine that so that hopefully we can just get the blue jeans. First and foremost, low saturations will probably deal with the shirt. Yeah, they're gone. So there they are. We got rid of them. You can see that change. There it is. Hopefully you can see it right here. There's the purple, and we'll pull it out. And as for the hair, let's see if we can adjust that. Let's increase the smoothness. I just want to get rid of that. Let's see if I can get rid of that. No, it doesn't look like I can get rid of that. Okay. And then what I can do is, okay, so we got the hair here. Let's see if I can interact with this at all by changing these sliders. So cyan isn't addressing it, and blue isn't addressing it. Okay, so I know that I've changed the color of the pants, and let's see if I can maybe address it with luminance. Let's see. Okay, so that's not changing the darker blues there. Oh, yeah, okay. So this is impacting the pants too much for me to be happy. So what I'll do is I'll showcase to everybody again. So we've selected the pants. We've removed it from the shirt there. Great. So we were able to do that, but we're going to still have to rely on a bit of manual help. So here's our active mask, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right click and I'll turn off, right click on my subject. And it's honestly so subtle. It's barely visible, but I'm just going to erase the application of this color EQ change from her hair so that there's less purple there. And we'll be able to see this corresponding to the mask. When I click on the mask, you can see that it's I've erased it from her hair. Does everybody see that? So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to, actually, I can just increase this. And that way we've removed that there. So what we've done here is we've made a color change, in this case, to the pants. And then we've made a very subtle pixel targeting adjustment that corresponds to sort of, in this case, that color range, that blue range, so that we've addressed that issue and we've changed this color of the pants while not interacting with other elements of our image. Okay, right click while using the brush. Yeah, so when you right click, that adds a selection, right? Sorry, when you left click, it adds the selection. And then when you right click, it removes the selection. So hopefully everybody can see that. I'll just increase the pressure to show this a little bit better. So left click, right click, and removes it from the active selection there. Awesome. Yeah. So that would be how you interact with a brush selection in this case. Even though this was a AI subject selection to begin with, I can still refine a subject selection by using the brush tool, which is automatic when it opens up the masking tool there. Yeah, I find that I have to adjust the nib width quite a bit. Note that if your mouse has a scroll wheel, the scroll wheel will impact the nib width, and you can see it changing there. So I'm not even interacting with this interface. I'm just scrolling on with my mouse scroll wheel. Okay, folks, that's kind of it for today. Hopefully you understand pixel targeting better, and luminance and color range gives you an idea of how to use it, how to best, it's a user interface that's kind of hidden for certain things. And this is one of those ones that helps you understand the tool, but brings it into attention and sort of why you'd want to use this. Really, I can't highlight enough, if you're selecting a subject and you have two very similar colors in terms of, say you have a dark blue and a light blue, this is a way to parse out those color differences, right? By interacting with a certain degree of saturation or luminance range. This is a way to make way better selections on your image and get way better application adjustments. So filters are going to look a lot better, a lot smoother using this. And it also addresses some challenges of making selections with just your brush tool. So if you don't like making manual adjustments, you can make a rough manual adjustment like we've done here, right? And you can address color differences or color changes by using the pixel targeting tool without having to make really, really refined selections. So hopefully that helps. Clayton asked a question, so we'll ask. Thank you so much, Doc. Appreciate it. Let's see here. Mike, thank you. Manfred, thank you so much. Richard, thank you. Marv, thank you so much. Not appreciate it. Frank, thanks. Let's see what else we have here. Laurent, thank you so much. Could you briefly touch on color wheels? Yeah, let's talk about color wheels. It's in edit mode, obviously. Oh, it's also in develop mode, actually. Sorry, I'm spacing out here. So in develop mode, color wheel works the same way. It's very binary in terms that it can adjust saturation, hue, brightness, contrast. So it's the exact same thing, but it doesn't have the pixel targeting tool to further edit, and it doesn't interact with selections. So while masking, pixel targeting was a way to refine masks, color wheels is a general color adjustment. So let's do blue, and we'll increase the saturation in our blue here. Or, we could change the hue to a pink or something like that. But you can see that this application is applied to the whole image here. So color wheel, same thing. It's just it's a general application rather than a manual selection application. Yeah. Versus, same thing in edit mode. Let's go into our image here. Process, restore to original. Go into edit mode. Same thing. It's actually exactly the same tool. So color wheel and edit mode, clicked on color wheel and boom, same thing. So if you want to adjust green in our image, increase the saturation of the green or the yellow in our image, then that's how you would do that. But again, it's a general application. There's a way to adjust this using the brush tool in this tool. So I could do that using the brush tool here. But I would still need to make a selection and use the tool to. The difference being in edit mode is you have the option to apply this adjustment, but I can also run a pixel targeting adjustment using within the filter. So I can use the pixel targeting within edit mode within a filter, which is sort of a bit different from develop mode. Or I can use the luminance and color range to do the same thing prior to making a selection altogether. So by using select and luminance and color range, this is a really good way to interact with adjustment layers versus filters. Filters will come, at least color and brightness filters will come pre-embedded with a pixel targeting refinement adjustment. So, but if you're familiar with the pixel targeting color range wheel, you're already familiar with the color wheel. It's right there. One more thing in edit mode is it has tone wheels as well. So they work sort of the same in that you can make a selection to a certain color. So orange, for example, and I can increase the saturation of that orange and also the brightness or darkness. But this corresponds to highlights, midtones, and shadows. So I could supplant blue in my shadows. I could do, I don't know, like a rouge red color in my midtones and highlights here. So I only mention this because it's another sort of color wheel kind of style setup. Okay. Let's see here. Antonio, you're so welcome. Yeah, behaves a bit differently in edit mode. Norm, these workshops are great, but a few minutes of reading the help contents about specific tools will clear up many questions. Yeah. My point is the current state of selection is only shown while you're moving the segment or clicking on the control and at the end of the add lines. No way to make it stay on. Is that Clayton? Sorry, may I? Is that an issue with the like the recording when or is that what you can see in Zoom? Is that what you're suggesting? I'm just a bit confused with the comment. I'd like to understand better. Oh, it's a user interface thing. Okay, I see. Yeah. I see. You're like the selection is shown. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the selection again is yeah, when you're in like the pixel targeting tool, for example, right? Or luminance and color range, that selection is shown to us actively as we go through. And then but it doesn't when we go to click like okay or something like that when we've refined our selection in some way, that's when we're making adjustments in this versus if we're going into color wheel. I'm not even sure if this is going to do a good job of making a selection. Yeah, I guess it still does a color selection. The overlay still shows up. But let's see if pixel targeting picks up on that. Yeah, it's not visible. That's a bit frustrating that you don't get that highlight. You would have to actually have made a saturation adjustment or something like that in order to, you know what? That's a really good feedback. I might pass that along to the developers because I'd still like to be able to see what I'm selecting in this mode, right? That completely makes sense. Yeah, no, I totally see. Yeah. Or yeah, like it only shows up actively, but then when you let go, it's gone. Yeah, I mean that means that you have to crank like an adjustment in order to see it, which isn't ideal, right? So I get it. That's a good suggestion, Clayton. Let me pass it on to the developers. I totally get it. There's the issue there, and then there's the sub issue of not actually being able to refine it and see what my what I've refined and how it impacts it. So, good point. Yeah, great point. That kind of covers it for today, folks. Anyone who's staying on, I guess that's it for the workshop today. Thank you so much for participating. I'll have this on YouTube in the next couple days. Yeah, and if anyone has any other questions, I'll just stay on for a sec. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Clayton, for the suggestion.